And as I was preparing my talk for this morning, I remembered kind of an interesting song. And actually it came from a story I saw on the news this week. The Rolling Stones are preparing their 50th anniversary this year, which is kind of amazing. And they're planning a series of concerts around the world, and I imagine they'll come to Japan, as they have many fans here. And of course, when I was a child growing up, their music was quite new back then. They were very popular. And they still have a lot of fans today. I never really listened much to their music, but one of their songs was quite, well, one of their many famous songs was a song called I Can't Get No Satisfaction. How many of you have heard that song before? Okay, a few hands. And in that song we have a message of futility, a message of dissatisfaction, of unhappiness. In this song, the person is saying, I can't get no satisfaction. I try, I do everything I can, but I still am not satisfied. And when I saw that story of them touring today, I thought of that song and its connection with the sermon that I was planning to preach this week, The Unfulfilled Life. Now, at the end of chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes, we discovered that the thing that we can do to gain happiness is to learn to be satisfied and content with what we have, the blessings that God gives us every day. And so it seems a little bit strange that in chapter 6, Solomon immediately launches into this discourse about unhappiness and dissatisfaction. We've just learned the answer to happiness, and Solomon turns around and begins to talk about how unfulfilling life is. And in chapter 6, Solomon talks about the dissatisfaction with living and pursuing happiness here on this earth, here and now, finding temporal happiness. And so this morning I'd like to review with you a few of the key thoughts found in chapter 6 of Ecclesiastes, and finally look at how we can have a fulfilling life as Christians. The beginning of the chapter, Solomon talks about wealth. Riches do not bring happiness, and they do not bring a reward. Now, most of us would like to have more money. Anyone like to have less money than what you have today? No, I don't think so. Right? We live in a very materialistic society, in a very materialistic world. Madonna, another very famous pop singer, you know, I'm a material girl. I'm living in a material world. And, you know, we have many songs that portray this obsession with money and material things. And in the history, in recent history, there was a great conflict in the earth between the idea of materialism and the idea of socialism, the idea of sharing wealth. Communism was based on the idea that everyone could have the same life, the state could balance everything out, everyone could be happy, and everything would be fine. How well did that work out? Well, the Soviet Union collapsed. Communism has more or less disappeared. Even the countries that are still communist in name, such as China and Cuba, have embraced capitalism and materialism. Is alive and well. If you go to China, you can see how wealth has changed people's lives and society. We live in a material world, and people are always pursuing and chasing after wealth and money, always wanting to have more. And yet, some of the most unhappy people in the world are those who are richest. And every year we see stories in the news or hear stories on the radio or TV of some wealthy, famous, successful person who kills himself. And we're like, wow, how could a person this rich, how could a person who seems to have everything, how can someone who has everything the world offers, how could they make this choice to kill themselves? How could they be unhappy when they seem to have so much? And yet, that's the way life works. Money does not buy happiness. The more you have, the more you have to worry about. The more you have, the more you have to lose. And often people become obsessed with possessions and wealth and pursuing money. They devote all their time and energy to the accumulation of money, and in the end they discover that their work and effort has no meaning. They reach the end of their lives and realize all of what they have is going to somebody else. As Solomon said, you accumulate all these things only to have someone else take the advantage of them. Whether it's your children, or the government, or strangers. If you spend your life pursuing wealth and accumulating wealth, you're never going to be able to enjoy it. In America, there's a very famous and funny bumper sticker on the back of the mobile home. I'm spending my children's inheritance. A couple of old retired people, they were traveling around. They were spending all of their money while they were alive. They weren't going to give any to their kids. And a lot of wealthy people say the same thing. People like Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world. Oh, I'm not going to give my money to my kids. Not all of it, you know. I'm going to donate it to charity or spend it on other things. You can't take it with you. And riches do not bring satisfaction in this life. Instead, they often bring turmoil, stress, worry, and conflict. When you have a lot of money, people are always trying to get it from you. Even in your own family, people are fighting and arguing over who is going to get the money once you're gone. Solomon also talked about long life. Now, Japan has one of the longest lifespans in the world. I think now the average woman is expected to live about 88 years in Japan, and the average man about 78 years. So Japan and the Japanese, for a variety of reasons, have a very long lifespan. People live a long time. And yet, in Japan, where people have the longest lifespan, there are a lot of unhappy people. And there are a lot of worried people. And in Japan now, there are too many old people. You know, the government is worried about pensions and health care. And the younger generations are worried. You know, who is going to take care of me when I reach that age? Will there be anything left? And even though Japan is a very prosperous and rich and wealthy country, the old people are worried and the young people are worried, and people don't want to live a long time. You know, I ask students, oh, how long would you like to live? If you could live as long as you wanted. Many of them are like, well, maybe until I'm 70, maybe 80. Like, you could live forever. Why would you only want to live 70 years, 80 years? Oh, I'm worried about having enough money. How will I support myself? Will the government be able to provide me the pension and health care I need if I live 100 years, or 120 years, or 200 years? No, that would be too much. And Solomon talks about, he makes a contrast, talking about the length of life. He contrasts a man who lives 100 years, who has many children and dies, against a baby that is born and dies immediately. You know, stillborn children. Now, of course, today this is not so common with our medical technology, especially in advanced countries like Japan. It's very rare for a newborn baby to die unless there's some serious health condition or health problem. Usually, newborn babies, they have a long life ahead of them. But Solomon looks at these two extremes. One, a child who's never survives to see any of life, against the man who lives a full life. And he finds that there are some problems in looking at how these two individuals have experienced life. Solomon says, in some ways, the baby has an advantage. It never knows any of the problems, the worries, the sufferings, the wants, the tribulations of life. It never experiences any of the difficulties of life. It's almost like it never existed. And since it never existed, it never was dissatisfied. It was never disappointed. It was never unhappy. Whereas the man who lived many years, often he has much hardship, many disappointments, much difficulty. And in his old age, he might have many regrets because his children do not turn out the way that he hoped. Or maybe he's even separated from his children. Or his children have died before him. The older man, the man who lives a long life, the longer life has only given him more opportunities to be dissatisfied, more opportunities to be disappointed, more regrets about the mistakes and things that he had done, and wishing that he could change his life as he reaches the end of it. Long life doesn't last, and long life doesn't always bring satisfaction. Now, getting something, being satisfied, does not satisfy you either. For example, how many of you ate breakfast this morning? All right. Okay. Is that going to keep you over for the rest of the week? No. No. Even if you eat a very big breakfast, after a few hours, or by the end of the day, you're going to be hungry again. We can eat and we can drink. We can do things to satisfy ourselves, but that satisfaction is only temporary. It's not permanent. It's not eternal. The satisfaction we get in this life, the things that we achieve, they only bring us satisfaction for a limited amount of time. We can eat a lot, it can be tasty, it can be delicious, and in a few hours we are going to be hungry again. Sometimes we are not satisfied even when we eat a lot. You have people that overeat. They have a craving, a desire, and they keep eating and eating and drinking beyond what they need and beyond what is healthy. Satisfaction with this world's things, whether it be food or money, pleasure, it's only temporary. It will never quench your thirst eternally. And when Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, he was addressing this issue, right? He was sitting by the well, the woman was drawing water, and he asked her for a drink. And they began to discuss life and the philosophy of life and satisfaction. And what did Jesus tell her? The water I give you, you will never be thirsty again. If you drink what I'm offering, you will be satisfied forever. And the woman was like, give me this. I don't want to come out here to the well every day and draw water. Of course, Jesus wasn't speaking about the physical water. The water he was speaking about was the water of life, the truth, salvation. The physical desires can only be satisfied for a short time. They can only be satisfied temporarily, and then they come back again, sometimes even stronger. We cannot be satisfied by the things of this world forever. Eventually we will need more or want more. Solomon talked about advantage next versus disadvantage. And he found that in this world, in the end, it makes no difference. It doesn't matter if you're born to a rich family or to a poor family. It doesn't matter if you're born in a developed country or a underdeveloped third world country, a developing country. In the end, what happens? You die. It doesn't matter what situation you were born into. It doesn't matter what advantages you have. In the end, both people, both situations come to the same end. And of course today we put a lot of emphasis on equality. In democracies, part of democracy is the idea of equality, regardless of your race or your sex or your birthplace or your income level. Everyone should be equal. That's the underlying philosophy or principle in democracy. And yet, is that what really happens? Of course not. There are inequalities. Being born in an advanced country gives you advantages. Being born in a developing country, you have disadvantages. Life is going to be more difficult. No matter where you are, no matter what advantages or disadvantages you have, the end result is the same. And Solomon thought that that was a little bit unjust. It didn't seem fair to him that life worked that way. But that's one of the problems of this world, and that's one of the problems of a sinful world. In a sinful world, life is not fair. In a sinful world, you suffer because of other people's mistakes. You could be living a perfectly healthy, normal life in full harmony with God's plan, but some other sinner and his actions could totally destroy your life here. Sin is not fair. Sin is not just. And in a world infected by sin, in a world under the influence of sin, we are going to see injustice. We are going to see inequality. We are going to see unfairness of situations. And we have to realize that's all part of this temporary world in which we live. And for those who look at this life as all they have, that is a cause of dismay and of distress. Another point that Solomon observed related to this unfulfilled life is that wanting is better than having. All of us have experienced this. When I first came to Japan, I went to a Japanese bakery. And I looked in the window and saw all these beautiful pastries. I thought, wow, those look really delicious. So I went in and bought a couple. And I bit into one. I was like, what? In America, we have very sweet teeth. And so our pastries use more sugar. And so when I first ate a Japanese pastry, I was disappointed. It looked very delicious, but it was not the taste I was used to. I was dissatisfied. It looked better than what it tasted for me. And on the other hand, the same year I baked some brownies for my girlfriend's birthday. And followed one of my mother's recipes, really nice brownies, nice thick layer of chocolate frosting. Took them over to her and her family. And they were like, ugh, I can't eat this. I got out a knife, was scraping off the frosting. I was like, what? That's the best part. They were dissatisfied too. They liked the look of the brownies, but when they ate them, oh, too sweet. It didn't match what they were expecting. Both cases, people were dissatisfied. They looked good, and we both expected them to taste good. But, again, a factor of this world. No two people have the same expectations. No two people can be satisfied with the same thing. And so we are constantly seeing something and thinking, that looks good, or I think that'll taste good. But when we get it, we find it doesn't meet what we expected. In business, it's called cognitive dissonance. A customer will buy something and be dissatisfied or unhappy with it. And part of marketing and part of advertising is to try to lower this. Advertising is not just to sell what the company has, it's to reinforce that, yes, that is a good car, or oh yeah, you'll like those cigarettes, or oh, this soft drink, yes, it is delicious. Because by nature, by human nature, we are dissatisfied with something once we get it. In English, we have the expression, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. What is out of reach, what we don't have, always looks better to us than what we possess. And once we possess something, we realize there are some problems. There are some defects. There are some shortcomings. And we immediately begin to think about what we will get to replace it. And that's what our society is based around today. You know, marketing today, new, improved, be happy, be satisfied, be fulfilled, use our product. Companies don't want you to be happy. If you're happy, you're not going to buy anything new. In America, there's a very famous appliance maker, Maytag. They make washing machines and dryers. And they used to show an advertisement many, many years ago for this company, to advertise the company. And it was showing the Maytag Repair Center. And there were all these repairmen sleeping and lying around. Nobody was working. They were all playing cards and reading the paper and watching baseball games on TV. None of them were working. And of course the message was, you buy one of our washing machines and you never have to call a repairman. It'll last forever. And in fact, Maytag did have a lifetime guarantee. If the washing machine broke, you could get a new one. Lifetime guarantee. Not many companies do that today. Because where's the profit? You know, if I sell you a washing machine and it lasts for 50 years, I'm only going to sell one. But if I have a washing machine that I upgrade every 5 years, oh, this one, it's bigger. Oh, it has another spin cycle. Oh, this can wash and dry. Some new feature. Well, then the customer is going to buy more, even though they don't need them. We call it planned obsolescence in marketing. People are never happy with what they have. They're always wanting to have something more. What they have always looks worse than something that they don't. Solomon then reflected on knowledge and learning. And he was the wisest man who ever lived, the most intelligent man who ever lived, who studied many, many, many things, investigated, examined, and yet Solomon discovered that the more you know, the less you know. The more information you gain, the more knowledge you accumulate, it only creates more questions. You discover one fact, oh, well, you know, what about this? Now I have to study this and analyze this and discover. And each discovery leads to more questions. There is never an end to learning. There is never a final destination in the accumulation of knowledge. There are always new discoveries, new theories, new understanding. Today we live in the information age. The internet is available at your fingertips, even on our mobile phones. You know, we can find information anywhere, anytime, any place. And yet, if you look for something with Google, you know, Osaka Castle, 2 million web pages. How many of you have time to look at 2 million web pages? Anyone? No. How can you find and understand all the information when there's so much available? It's impossible. It's there, but it's beyond our comprehension. It's beyond our capacity. There is no way we can master all of the information. I like computers. And from when I was in junior high school, I grew up in Silicon Valley, the home of the IT boom and revolution. And I started programming computers even before personal computers were available. So I've always had an interest in computers. And when I was in high school, I used to read 2 or 3 computer magazines to keep up with the new software and the new hardware. And when I started teaching, I was teaching computer programming, computer science in Silicon Valley for 3 years. And every week, I went to our school library, and there were 3 or 4 magazines, and I would read those magazines and those newsletters. And by reading those magazines, I could keep up with the technology as it was advancing. But today, how many computer magazines are there? Many! Many! Computer technology has exploded into many fields and many specialties. many operating systems, many languages, many kinds of hardware. It's impossible to keep up with all of the breakthroughs and with all of the products. Now, you can get some highlights. You know, I check the technology news every day, and I can see the highlights, but I don't have the ability to discuss and to answer questions about all of the technology today. It's impossible. There's just too many fields. There's too much. And to Solomon, this seemed to be another point of futility in life. We can never know everything. There are always going to be more questions. We can never have satisfaction through the pursuit of knowledge. And so as a Christian, where does that leave us? You know, we have all of these areas of life in which we are dissatisfied and unfulfilled here in this life. How, as Christians, can we find fulfillment in this life? And I think that there are answers in Scripture to this, and I'd like to just look at 3 texts with you in closing, which summarize some of these answers. The first one is found in Proverbs chapter 19, verse 23. Proverbs 19, that's found on page 634. Proverbs 19, verse 23. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble. If we seek God, if we know the truth about God, if we understand the truth about our world, if we realize this world is temporary, it's only a stopping place, it's not our final destination, then we can find contentment. And Paul talks about this in his letters. He says, I've learned to be content in every situation. Because we know this is not the final stop. This is not our final destination. In fact, Paul says, you know, if this is our final destination, if this earth is all we have, then we Christians are fools. If there is no eternal life, if there is no heaven, then we are fools, because we are giving up all of the temporary pleasures of this life. We are living a miserable life sometimes in this life and have no hope for the future. As Christians, though, we know there is a future, something more beyond. This is not our final destination. The second verse I'd like to look at is found in the book of Joel in the Old Testament as well. Joel chapter 2. Joel is a minor prophet. Joel chapter 2. Verse 26. That's found on page 883. 883. Joel chapter 2, verse 26. Verse 26. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. In this chapter, Joel is promising the people of Israel are sharing with the people of Israel God's promise that God will provide what they need. And we find the same thing repeated by Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, in the very famous Sermon on the Mount. You know, Jesus says, why are you worried about your food and your clothes? God will provide everything you need. Seek you first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these other things will be given unto you. And finally, I'd like to close by looking at a Psalms chapter 112. Psalms 112. That's found on page 595. And this Psalms was a psalm written by Moses. A psalm written by Moses. So I'd like to read with you Psalms 112, the whole Psalms. It's just 10 verses. Praise the Lord. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who finds great delight in His commands. His children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are His house, and His righteousness endures forever. Even in darkness, light dawns for the upright, for the gracious and compassionate and righteous man. Good will come to him who is generous and lends freely, who conducts his affairs with justice. Surely he will never be shaken. A righteous man will be remembered forever. He will have no fear of bad news. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. His heart is secure. He will have no fear. In the end, he will look in triumph on his foes. He has scattered abroad His gifts to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. His horn will be lifted high in honor. The wicked man will see and be vexed. He will gnash his teeth and waste away. The longings of the wicked will come to nothing. As Moses clearly shares in this Psalms, the righteous man has God. And God will provide all that he needs. The righteous man can be content and secure and free from fear, knowing that God is in control. And in contrast, the wicked sees the righteous and is perplexed and puzzled. The world does not understand the truth. The world does not understand Christians. The world does not understand the values and the principles by which we live. And the world will come to nothing. But the righteous, they will live to see the final reward. They will receive the promise that God has made to each one of us. So my prayer today in closing is that we learn to trust God. Realize that this life is a temporary stopping point, and that the pleasures and the rewards of the world are temporary. They are things which will pass away. But we are striving for a prize which is eternal and which will never pass away.